Welcome, everyone, to this segment of Globe Summit. I'm Meredith Goldstein, and I'm so happy to be with you today. For those who don't know me, I write about relationships for the Boston Globe, and I also write about the arts. So today I could not be more thrilled to bring you a whole session about storytelling with Siân Hede, who you might know as the filmmaker behind the Oscar-winning film Coda. One thing you might not know about this wonderful filmmaker is that she also happens to be a Massachusetts person. So just to begin with, Siân, welcome, and welcome to everyone who's watching in person and online. It's so lovely to see you all. Siân, thank you for coming, and can you start by telling us your origin story in Massachusetts?
Of course. I'm so happy to be here, and I wish I had a giant chair as well, Meredith. You're so little in your massive chair. I love it. I wish I could be there in person. I'm happy to be joining you all virtually. I grew up in Cambridge, and I went to Cambridge Ringe and Latin, and my parents are both artists who live and work in Cambridge as well. And I think, one of the lovely things about getting to tell the story of Coda was getting to tell a story about a place that I knew very well. I spent a lot of time on the North Shore as a kid. And so it was really lovely to get to make a movie about a place that I had an intimate relationship with.
So for those of us who have not made a film, I think it's a big mystery about how you go from the inception, an idea, to getting something on screen. And I'm sure it's not a very specific, narrow path. Can you tell us if you went a route that an independent filmmaker often goes? Is there a typical route? Can you sort of walk us through the beginning to actually seeing it on a screen?
Wow. Independent filmmaking is so, it's like herding cats. You are trying to collect these pieces, in order to it takes a massive amount of, people and energy and money. And I think certainly when you're starting out as an artist and as a filmmaker, when maybe you don't have a big name or, my first film took me 9 years to make. It was a movie called Tallulah, and it was just pushing a boulder up a hill. And I, was the person who was really committed to telling that story and making it happen. Coda actually started out as a studio movie. So it was originally set up at Lionsgate, and it was a remake of a French film called La Famille Bélier. And it's interesting that sort of in developing the film at the studio and writing the project, I was approached as a filmmaker to come in and pitch my take on this French movie. And having grown up, spending a lot of time in Gloucester, Massachusetts, I thought that Gloucester was a really interesting place. It had undergone a lot of changes. The fishing industry had sort of collapsed and been the thing that the town was built around, and was disappearing, and the town was kind of trying to find its identity. And it also had this great combination of being a very visually stunning place that felt quintessentially New England and nostalgic, but also was very working class and gritty, and had this whole other element that I thought was a really interesting juxtaposition within the town. So I went in and pitched them, like, what if this was a story that took place in Gloucester and was about a fishing family? And the studio was very excited about that idea. And in the course of writing the movie, I, spent a lot of time in Gloucester writing, and talking to the Fishermen's Wives Association and going out with the fishermen on their boats, and spending time with the deaf community and really understanding that world and that community. And I became very committed to a lot of principles that I wanted to use when making the movie. I really was committed to using deaf actors, and having authentic casting. I was committed to using ASL for a lot of the movie, and not having my lead character, who was hearing, speak throughout the movie. I really wanted a lot of silence in the film. I wanted subtitles for the ASL as opposed to Ruby translating. And a lot of those things were bumps for the studio. And I think the movie sort of got smaller and smaller in their minds, and I don't know that they could see the commercial potential of it. And I think because I was not willing to make a lot of those compromises, the movie ended up dying at the studio, and I sort of had to grieve the loss of this film. And then we got it out of the studio and ended up making it independently for a lot less money. But it was really a Coda, my first film was a 9-year journey. Coda was a 3-year journey from the time that I wrote the script until the time that we were actually making the movie. It's definitely not a straight path forward. And you have to have a lot of um, faith in your own story and patience, honestly, to sort of wait for the right elements around a project to come together and have it finally get off the ground.
I want to talk about the story you wanted to tell in Massachusetts and the fact that it actually is set here. And so much of Globe Summit, I think, watching has been about how to get things done. Like there's so many incredible ideas moving around, and actually having a system that gets you there is so helpful. And I wonder if you could speak to a tax credit we have in Massachusetts that incentivizes people to film here. It's been a point of controversy sometimes. It's been something that people have really pointed to as an example of getting a lot of creative people here. How did it help you actually film a Boston and Massachusetts and Cape Ann story where it is set?
Well, one of the things that's happening right now in the business, which is honestly frustrating as a filmmaker, is that production is moving wherever the tax credits live. So it's almost a lot of story has lost a sense of place because you are, going to Atlanta and pretending that it's Florida, or we're pretending Atlanta is a lot of places these days because Atlanta has a very large tax credit. Or you're in Toronto and you're pretending that it's New York and you're sort of shooting on the same New Yorky looking streets that everyone else has shot on that are familiar in every movie. And what I find frustrating, I think for me in Coda, especially, Gloucester was a character in the movie, and Gloucester was just as important a character as any of my actual characters in my family. It really had a whole identity. And my producers, I wrote it for Gloucester. It was so specific. Like those cliffs that the kids jump off in the movie were cliffs that I jumped off when I was 16. I had scenes that were just set for a sense of place. And my producers, when it came time to shoot, said, well, obviously we're going to take this to Canada. And I was like, we can't take this to Canada. Like, nothing's going to feel real. And I want to be able to explore this town, and I want it to be about the place. And the tax credit really helped because it was a way to pitch to my producers, look, this script and this story was written for this place. And this is allowing us to do it here. It might not be as big a tax credit as it is if we took it out of the country, but we can do it here. And there's good crews and there's good. And what I think the thing people don't realize about a movie is the ripple effects of how many people you actually are employing. It's not just your local crew that you're hiring. It's, all the Airbnbs and hotels that you rent for your crew. It's the restaurants that everyone's eating out on. It's the construction materials. It's the construction crews that are coming in to build your set. And I think the exciting thing is just how much involvement there was from the town too. It really felt like we were tapping into a community network in order to make the movie. And it was really a beautiful thing. I think it gave me a very strong sense of understanding the city and its identity in a much deeper way than I ever did, even as a kid spending time there or as an adult vacationing there. I wasn't exploring the waterfront or the fish processing plants or going out on people's boats. It was really a way of getting under the skin of the city that was pretty eye-opening and a beautiful, like, connective experience.
I got the sense watching it again yesterday, and of course I had the benefit of seeing it in theaters and then, under the covers in my house yesterday, seeing the local talent and seeing that you had a lot of people to bring into the fold. And I wonder if you could speak to that, of who you found here once you got here ready to start this project.
Well, I think it wasn't just actors. It was like the sort of amazing connections that you find unexpectedly. Like when I was researching all the Coast Guard stuff, I ended up like cold calling, the harbor master in Gloucester, who's now a very good friend of mine, TJ, but calling him just to be like, hey, I'm writing these scenes, and I need some information about how the Coast Guard would talk to each other. And And he ended up sort of talking to me about it and then talking to me. And then he was like on my Marine crew, and he ended up doing the stunt where the guy, the Coast Guard boards the boat, and he actually did that stunt because he was in the Coast Guard and had done it a million times. And or you scout a location and it's this old processing plant, but the guy who runs it, is also an artist, and he's done all these paintings of Gloucester. So we took his art and put it on the walls of the Rossi home. And so I think you don't really know the layers of kind of talent and community that you're going to uncover once you start trying to really tell a story about the place. But it's what I loved about making the movie is we were recruiting people from the bar to be in the bar scene. And we were, filling the fisherman's meeting with actual fishermen who lived in the town. Like the captain of the boat that we used is in the movie, in the fisherman scene. So it's just a gift as a filmmaker to get to kind of draw on not just like the local actors or my camera operators or my local crew. It was also just sort of imbuing the story with authenticity, not just, in representing the deaf characters or the fishermen, but in actually like really being authentic to the place.
We're here to talk about the art of storytelling, and I assume Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are watching today, so I say this.
Obvious.
Obviously, what else would they be doing today? I want to say this and start by saying the town is one of my favorites, but so often, especially having lived here now for 20 years, I am looking for a film that tells a story about Massachusetts and Boston that is not about certain things we're used to seeing. And I noticed that even with the tax credit, films that were filmed here were actually set in New York. I'm thinking about Comedy's Bride Wars. But with your film, even though it does bring us to a fishing industry that may have been depicted on film before, it was a very fresh take to me to see a story about a woman who wants to be a singer, who is a caregiver for her family, who is, a sibling, a young person who seems to live so far from Boston, but right next to Boston. It was a story I was so happy to see told. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about telling a story about a place that maybe becomes a part of one specific narrative, and just the importance of different stories being told about different people. If you could talk about that, and even just your own perceptions of what your hometown has looked like on screen.
I mean, it is interesting. I've spent my whole life watching Boston accents in movies and just cringing. That's my biggest pet peeve, is just like, someone learn how to do this accent. I think it's really interesting to think about like specificity in story. And I think one of the things that I really discovered, and I think is a really beautiful lesson to learn, is that there's this idea that I think particularly among studio executives or among, kind of now all these algorithms that we're working with, that, generality, like these big general blankets about, universal experiences are what are going to move people or touch an audience. And one of the things that I discovered specifically through Coda is, yes, I told a story about a very specific place and a teenage girl and a deaf family, and the stories in ASL and the culture of not only the family, but the community is very, very specific. And yet, because it was so specific, I found that it was connected to a lot of people in a very universal, unexpected way. One of the surprising connections was a lot of children of immigrants coming up and talking to me after seeing the movie and just saying to me, that was my story. I came here. My parents didn't speak English. I was translating for them at the doctor. I was always the person in my family. I had so much guilt about leaving home and leaving my family. And, there I was seeing a movie about a deaf family, and I saw my story on screen. And I think it's just an important idea to hold on to, that incredible specificity, something that gets at, a very specific dilemma or conflict, the idea of being a caregiver or the responsibility you have to your family and your sense of duty versus your own personal dreams and ambitions. the more specific that story is, the more it actually hits a nerve, specifically with people. And it's sort of why I feel that we all need to be exposed to like a broad range of stories, because you actually never know what's going to touch you or unlock something or give you some cathartic moment that you weren't expecting.
So we at the Globe are in a constant state of asking the question, how is it best to tell this story? Is it in the traditional ways? Is it through a podcast? Is it through a newsletter? And for someone like you who's worked in television, who's made films, do you see yourself swayed by the possibilities for storytelling? And what has it been like to watch all of us consume stories in new ways, whether it be on streaming services, binging 1,000 episodes in a weekend of a show. For a while I was told, oh, everybody's watching TV and not seeing movies. And then we see this past summer how many people will run to a theater with the right marketing. So I'm wondering, as a storyteller, how much you pay attention to this and what it makes you think about the art of storytelling.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, the business has been on a radical journey for the last 10 years. And I think the way people consume stories has changed and evolved. And certainly, we're 143 days into a writer's strike, and SAG's, 60 something days into the SAG strike. And like, this is a result of this. It's a result of, the storyteller getting diminished in value as these kind of big companies are making more and more money off of our stories. And I think, as someone who I wrote on Orange is the New Black for the first season when Netflix was still a DVD company. And I remember getting that job and thinking, like, is this a web series? Like, what is this? Is anyone going to watch this? Like, no one's going to watch shows on the internet. And then I remember when the season came out and I found out that they were going to release all 13 episodes at once and being like, what? Like, why would you do that? And but assuming that it would take people a while. And I remember Netflix had charted, they knew that there was one guy who had started the season, like the moment it launched, and then 13 hours later was done. And they they knew the subscriber who'd done that and sent him like a free year of Netflix or whatever they sent him. And I remember there was this like crushed feeling of like, do you know how long it took us to make this 13 hours of TV? Like, it took us a year. Like, we worked so hard in the rewriting and the set and the story, being in the writer's room and breaking it and then production. And it was sort of like, yes, cooking this like massive, incredible meal and then having someone like scarf it down while they weren't, fully focused on every bite. But it's just the reality. And it's like, I do it now too. It's, you get hooked on, there's something very satisfying about, about being sucked into something that makes you want to do that. At the same time, I think we are craving, community around our storytelling. I think there's a reason people are returning to the theater. I think it's a very different experience when something is eventized and you feel like you're participating in something special. And I actually think the pandemic really changed. There was a time where it was like, well, no one's ever going to go back to the movies at all. Everyone wants to be on their couch in their pajamas watching stuff. And I think the pandemic trapped us on our couches watching stuff alone. And I certainly came out of it craving to be back in a movie theater, hearing people laugh or gasp or have a moment or have a drink at the bar outside the movie theater and talk to other people about the movie we just saw. So I'm really hopeful that the sense of kind of communal experience around watching a story is something that is innately human and hopefully something that we're returning to. Because as we get kind of siloed and more alone in these little bubbles, I think we're going to need each other to participate in kind of the act of watching a story.
We're just about out of time somehow, but I just wondered if you had the quickest few words of advice to storytellers who are trying to grow their work and find some success.
I think, oh gosh, like what is the one word of wisdom? I think that it's so hard to make a movie. It's really just a massive undertaking, energetically, emotionally, physically. And my word of advice is, tell the story that won't leave you alone. that you wake up at night and you think about in the middle of the night, or that is sort of always in the back of your head. And it should be something that really moves you and is a conversation you want to have, because you're going to be having that conversation for a really long time. So that would be, the obstacles facing you as a filmmaker. The no is so strong that comes at you, that you have to have such a deep belief and strong sense of why your story needs to be told and made, and why you need to be the one to tell it, that I would say, that is the story to get behind.
Well, thank you so much, Sean. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and storytellers out there, good luck. And continue to watch Globe Summit and to attend. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.